What's up guys, this is Ultimate iDevice Vids, and with the release of iOS 14.7, today in this video we're going to be doing a massive battery drain test comparing iOS 14.7 to iOS 14.6 on all iPhone generations. And as usual, we're using the base model phones from each generation, as including the Pro, Plus, and SE models would just be a little bit too chaotic. And also, of course, the very same iPhones were used for both battery drain tests. I first did this test on iOS 14.6, and then I updated all these phones to iOS 14.7 and performed the exact same test again on the very same iPhones. The iOS 14.7 test is on the bottom and the iOS 14.6 test is on the top. And as usual, before we get started, I want to show you guys a few things. So as you can see, True Tone and Night Shift are disabled on all these devices in both tests. Also, auto brightness is disabled on all of them as well. And here's the battery health capacity for all these devices, and they're all pretty high, but they're not all at 100%. However, as I always say, the point of these videos is not really to compare the phones to one another. It's to compare how these phones do on these two iOS versions and comparing the two firmwares to one another. And with the brightness set to the same amount on all these devices using a lux meter and the volume turned down on all devices, we're going to go ahead and turn off the power source that these devices are connected to in both tests and remove the cables. And we'll kick things off with 1 hour of YouTube video streaming. We'll make sure the video is full screen and set to 1080p on all devices. And after a full hour of YouTube video streaming, checking in, you could see very little difference. They basically all dropped more or less a similar or the same amount of percentage. So we're going to take it on over to Instagram for 1 hour of looking at stories and posts. And as I often do, I just want to take a moment to say that even though I do my best to ensure that there's the minimum possible amount of differing variables in these tests, there's always going to be minor little differences between these two tests. So rather than looking at these tests as percent point by percent point, hyper detailed analysis, you should just kind of take it as gauging overall battery performance. So checking in after an hour of Instagram, as you can see here, once again, things are looking very similar. So it's definitely looking good for iOS 14.7. Seems to be basically the same performance so far. And next up, we're going to see how these two firmwares do in Minecraft. So we're going to head on over to Minecraft for 1 hour of gameplay on both. And since I only have two hands, for the first 30 minutes of Minecraft, I interacted with the three newest devices, leaving the three oldest devices idle with the game running. And for the second 30 minutes, I interacted with the three oldest and left the three newest devices idle running. So all the devices for both tests get the same amount of interactive gameplay versus idle time in this app. And checking in after a full hour of Minecraft, you can see here, basically very similar performance here yet again. There's a few minor differences in the amount of percentage loss for a couple devices, but I'd say it's a negligible amount. So next we're going to head on over to Safari and we're going to do 1 hour of web browsing. So we're going to be loading new web pages and scrolling through web pages on apple.com for the first 30 minutes, and for the second 30 minutes we're going to do that on theverge.com. And just to let you guys know, iOS 14.7 may be the last major update to iOS 14 before iOS 15 gets released this fall. Of course, it's possible we see an iOS 14.8, but we're definitely getting there. So it seems like 14.7 is stacking up pretty well against 14.6 in regards to battery life, which is good to see towards the end of a major release cycle. And checking in after an hour of web browsing, as you can see there, on iOS 14.6, the 6S and 7 are literally just barely hanging on with 1%. Of course, the 6S and 7 on 14.7 are also pretty low there at 7 and 6%. So pretty comparable here, and same thing goes for the other devices, minor differences. But overall, I definitely say same performance. And next up, we're going to play Subway Surfers for 30 minutes. And just as we did in Minecraft for the first half, so the first 15 minutes of this test, I'm going to interact with the three newest devices while leaving the three oldest devices in idle mode, and vice versa for the second 15 minutes. And at 4 hours and 2 minutes into this test, the iPhone 7 on 14.6 dies. And about 12 minutes later, the iPhone 6S on iOS 14.6 also dies at 4 hours and 14 minutes in. And a few minutes later, the iPhone 6S on iOS 14.7 also dies at 4 hours and 19 minutes in. And just a couple minutes later, the iPhone 7 on 14.7 joins it, dying at 4 hours and 22 minutes in. And alright, so checking in after Subway Surfers with the iPhone 8 and above in both tests being the only devices still remaining, the amount of percentage lost for both tests remains steady and similar. So next we're going to head on over to Temple Run for 10 minutes of gameplay with ads appearing in between each round of the game. And once again, for the first half of this test, so 5 minutes, I'm going to interact with the three newest devices, leaving the three oldest in idle mode, and vice versa for the final 5 minutes. And checking in after 10 minutes of Temple Run, as you can see here, yet again, similar numbers. In fact, the amount of percentage loss for each device in both both tests was the exact same in this case, as you can see. So next up, we're going to head on over to PUBG for 1 hour of gaming. So we'll launch up the app on all devices here. And once again, the same strategy is going to be used here in terms of device interaction. And 5 hours into this test, the iPhone 8 on iOS 14.6 dies. And 4 minutes later, at 5 hours and 4 minutes in, the iPhone 8 on 14.7 also dies. And even though the 3 oldest devices are currently dead, just because this test was designed to accommodate if they were still alive, 30 minutes into the test, I'm going to stop interacting with the 3 newest devices and just leave them idle for the remainder. And 5 hours and 32 minutes into this test, the iPhone 11 on 14.6 dies next. And just 1 minute later, the iPhone 11 on 14.7 also dies at 5 hours and 33 minutes in. And literally just a few seconds later, still at 5 hours and 33 minutes, the iPhone XR on 14.6 dies as well. And all right, so after a full hour of PUBG, as you can see here on iOS 14.6, the iPhone 12 is the only device remaining, and on 14.7, it's the 12 and the XR just barely hanging on at 1%. But in terms of the 12, as you can see, very similar performance from PUBG. So with the first round of the test complete, we're going to head back to YouTube and stream the very same video for another hour at 1080p quality, of course, and full screen. And very quick into the second round of YouTube video streaming, the iPhone XR on 14.7 dies at 5 hours and 46 minutes into the test. And with the iPhone 12s being the only 2 devices remaining, we'll close out the remainder of this hour of YouTube. And checking in, as you can see, they both lost 6%. So similar performance there, with 14.6 being at 21% and 14.7 being at 25%. So we're going to head back to Instagram for another hour of looking at stories and posts. And once again, they both lost the exact same amount of percentage in this, leaving the 12 on 14.6 at 14% and the 12 on 14.7 at 18%. So next, we're going to head on over to Minecraft for the second scheduled hour. And 8 hours and 14 minutes in, the iPhone 12 on 14.6 dies. And just a little while later here at the 30-minute mark, once again, even though there's no other devices remaining, this test was designed in case they were, so I'm going to stop interacting with the 12 and leave it in idle mode on Minecraft. And 8 hours and 34 minutes in, the iPhone 12 on 14.7 finally dies. So there you guys have it for the battery drain test. As you can see, very similar performance on both iOS versions. And even though it's very negligible, I just thought it was interesting. As you can see, every single device lasted a little bit longer on 14.7 in this test, even if it was just by literally a few minutes. And as I always say, of course, battery tests entirely depend on what you do on your device, and there's just a ton of variables that can contribute to how your battery life is. So it's tough to say what specifically caused this difference. Maybe it is under the hood optimizations in iOS 14.7, or it could be something entirely different. And all right, so let's move on to the final test we're going to do, which is the 12-hour standby test. So the 12-hour standby tests how these devices are able to hold up completely asleep over long periods of time. And once again, as I just said, there's a ton of variables that contribute to these tests, especially standby. Of course, it all depends on any processes you have running in the background, your cell signal strength, notifications you're getting on your device, and again, just a ton of other factors. This is a very controlled test in this example. There's no SIM cards in any of these phones. They're all connected to the same Wi-Fi network. And as you can see here, both iOS versions have the same notification settings as well. And all right, with that all being said, we're going to go ahead and turn off the power source these devices are connected to. We'll remove the cables, and we'll put all the devices to sleep here, and we'll just start a stopwatch here, and we'll let it go for 12 hours, and then we'll check back in. And checking in after 12 hours, as you can see here in this example, all devices did quite well, losing not very much percentage. As you can see, there are no percentage in a few devices. But all right, guys, that just about wraps it up. Let me know down below in the comments section which iOS version you're running and what your experience with battery life has been like. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.